Well, it's time for us to go ahead and move into the presentations. We're going to begin again with Dr. Ty Lawrence. And Ty, your slides are already on the screen. Take it away, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Overman, thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. We'll talk a little bit about what will happen in this project with these cattle once they are complete with the finishing process and arrive at the beef processor. So let me advance. I'll start with the observations that we will record during the harvest process and describe those in brief detail, and then we'll move on to those things that happen in the cooler. So initially, once the animals arrive to slaughter, they'll be unloaded from the truck. They will be inspected, what we call antemortem inspection by a USDA veterinarian or his or her designee. And then those animals will sit in lairage in the pens at the slaughterhouse for typically 2 to 4 hours. At that point, they will be moved out of their pen to the stunning line, and they will be stunned with a captive bolt pistol that is using compressed air. At this facility, they'll be using a Temple Grandin designed knockbox, and then those animals will be exsanguinated. Shortly after the exsanguination procedure, one of my students will individually record the visual ID of those animals. And we do this regularly for research. And as you see in this image, this student is recording the visual ear tags. That could be the case in this research, or in the case of others where they have a low frequency or a high frequency electronic identification tag, we would record that as well. The next piece that we will make an observation of is how many permanent incisors that animal had. In the beef industry, we have a delineation point when an animal reaches 3 or more permanent incisors. It is deemed a 30+ animal. And you might recall the cow that stole Christmas on December 23rd of 2003. That is when this regulation came, more or less came into being. Technically, it was 2 weeks later in January, but since then we have delineated whether or not an animal does or does not have 3 or more permanent incisors. I doubt that any of these cattle will, but in the event that one of them does, it will be delineated as a 30+ carcass. And you'll notice that is the first discount that appears on my screen. When an animal illustrates or exhibits 3 or more permanent incisors, it is segregated as 30+. It is it's fabricated at a different time. It's sold to a different customer, and it's really a pain for the beef processor to deal with. Thus, they apply a $20 per hundredweight discount if we bring one of those animals to harvest to a young fed steer or heifer facility. The next piece of the puzzle here is that we will, independent of the beef processor, cross-reference the identification. Not to say that we don't trust them, but we've learned over the years that they make mistakes as well. And for research, we don't want any mistakes. So we'll apply an individual identity to those animals that is different from the beef processor. Then the animal will go through the dehiding process, and that will take about 15 to 20 minutes. And then it will arrive at what we call the gut table. And we're going to have 2 students at the gut table that are looking at 2 different outcomes of each of the animals. The first of those is liver abscesses. And in brief, liver abscesses are an outcome in which bacteria, particularly Fusobacterium necrophorum, the same bacteria that causes foot rot and diphtheria in cattle, escapes the GI tract and enters the portal vein. And it is commonly thought to be only a problem in cattle finishing. That is actually a fallacy. If we took cull cows and we followed them to market at a cull cow slaughterhouse, we would find that about 16% of cull range cows have a liver abscess, and about 19% of cull dairy cows have a liver abscess. So it is not just a problem in the cattle feeding sector. The few images that I'm going to illustrate here are a variety of what we'll see. Hopefully we see a lot of what I have on the screen right now, which is a clean, edible liver. This liver will require just some minor trimming to remove a little bit of connective tissue, and then it will be boxed and packaged and sold primarily to foreign markets, actually primarily to an Egyptian foreign market. They're the #1 buyer of US beef liver. The remaining slides that I'll show on liver abscesses illustrate a less than ideal outcome. This is a minor abscess situation, which we call an A. And you can see two pockets of purulent material. Those pockets are more or less just masses of inactivated white blood cells that were inactivated by a leukotoxin produced by the bacteria Fusobacterium necrophorum, which is what causes this liver to be condemned. More severe cases would appear, such as what is now on the screen, what we call an A+ liver, an indication that this animal was fighting a severe infection throughout its liver. The important part to take note of for the cattle feeding enterprise is when the animal's liver is fighting this active infection, it is metabolizing nutrients much less efficiently. Thus, it is growing slower, gaining slower, and will end up bringing to market a lighter weight, leaner carcass that is lower in muscling and lower in quality. And so this manifests itself as a negative economic consequence. And then we have even some more cases, and some of these are even more severe. The one on the screen now is what we would call an adhesion. And in addition to having a negative consequence for a less than ideal efficient liver, you notice that this slide illustrates a part of the diaphragm still connected to the liver. The diaphragm should never be connected to the liver. In this case, it was because of a very strong infection in which the animal was trying to heal, and fibrin connective tissue attached the liver to the diaphragm. In any case, when we see this, the diaphragm was cut out and removed during the gutting process, thus limiting A, the ability to sell carcass, because we don't weigh the carcass until it gets to the carcass scale, and B, the loss of saleable product. Diaphragm is what you would commonly eat as fajita meat, and we no longer can sell that for this animal. And then the most severe case is what we call an open abscess. And I say it's the most severe because the entire gut mass is now condemned, and the packer does not receive any value for the liver or any of the viscera that happens to come out during the gutting procedure. And on average, that's about a $50 per animal loss when we see this occurrence. One of the reasons that we'll evaluate liver abscesses is because it's such a large issue in our industry. Right now, an estimated total of about $190 million loss across our industry in a year due solely to liver abscesses. So it's an industry issue that we continue to battle year in and year out. I'll move over to lung lesions. We're going to evaluate the lung because that is an indication of health, primarily in the realm of BRD or bovine respiratory disease. So one of the things that we'll evaluate is the presence or absence of fibrin connective tissue between the lobes. And secondly, a score of how much of the lung is consolidated if we observe consolidation. Hopefully, all of the lungs come out looking just like what I show you in this image here, which is fundamentally a biological balloon that fills up with air and then collapses, expelling all of the air back out of the body. In some of the cattle, we might find what we call minor consolidation. You see in the yellow circle, there's some rather dark purple lung color. In that image, the dark purple area is inactive lung. That lung is consolidated and it is no longer capable of taking in oxygen or expelling carbon dioxide. And that animal is running on less than 100% of its lung capacity. As the lung score gets worse, we have what we call a peel out in the beef processing industry. In this case, the left side of that image, which is actually the right side of the lung, was removed during the harvest process because it was adhered to the thoracic cavity. And so that animal had limited use of that right side of the lung because of a prior infection. And in severe cases, the lung peel out would look something like this, where just a minor part of the lung is able to be removed. The remainder of the lung was glued to the thoracic cavity with fibrin connective tissue. So again, we'll document all of this primarily because we associate an increased lung lesion outcome to decreased performance. And I put just a little bit of data together for you real quick. If we have no lung lesion versus an inactive and or minor lung lesion versus an active or major lung lesion, these data clearly illustrate the more severe lung outcome we see at slaughter, the lower the performance in reduced average daily gain. The smaller, lighter weight carcass we're able to sell, the poorer that animal grades in terms of quality grade and marbling, and a lower yield grade because it just didn't have the ability to fatten. And then getting into Dr. Miller's talk, we'll go ahead and say that those cattle are going to be tougher and produce a less palatable carcass. At the end of that process, we'll evaluate the hot carcass weight. In this image, the carcass that is on the left is actually sitting on top of the hot carcass weight scale. So we'll do that standing next to an in-motion scale that measures the hot carcass of a side every 3.5 seconds. So I will say that the slaughterhouse that this project will end at slaughters cattle at the rate of 1 every 7 seconds. And so everything we do is fundamentally at high speed. And after the animal leaves the hot carcass scale, it will go into what we call the hot box. The hot box is actually a misnomer. It is not hot. Most commercial processors keep their hot box at approximately 28 Fahrenheit with a steady rate of moving air to chill the carcass rapidly. A hot box typically operates with carcasses in it for 24 to 48 hours prior to the grading operation. At the processor that this project will end up at, they're currently running at 30 hours of chill between slaughter and grading. Now, moving into the grading operation, we're fundamentally worried about 2 outcomes, and those are what are the quality aspects of the carcass, and then secondly, what are the yield? And so I'll go across these in brief. Fundamentally, the quality outcome of a carcass is its marbling score. There are adjustments made for maturity, and those include how many teeth the animal had based on its dentition score. It also includes the skeletal ossification of the bone maturity of that animal as an adjustment, although we've made some changes in our grading system recently. It also includes a minor adjustment for lean color score as well. But the primary outcome for the average consumer is to understand that marbling is the key driver for quality grading. And these images here clearly delineate the quality that would be expected for each of the grades that are illustrated. Prime is our highest quality product. Currently, we're at 10.3% prime day in, day out. And you'll notice extremely high quantity of those flecks of fat or marbling that are interspersed within the muscle fibers. Then we have a premium choice and choice. So premium choice is a sorting of the upper 2/3 of the choice grade into an independent and unique market. And we do that at a premium for the producer, and we sell that at a premium to the consumer. Choice in total is 3/4 of our beef marketing system. And then we see down the next opportunity is Select at 14.9%. So we're getting a lower amount of Select beef day in, day out as we improve quality in our beef marketing system. And then at the very right, you see no roll, almost non-existent in our marketing system. And that's good. That indicates that we're making great strides in improving quality and providing that fantastic palatability and highly desired eating experience for our worldwide consumers. As I have switched gears, I'll talk briefly about yield grading. This is an outcome that the average consumer is completely unaware of, because this is only important in the financial exchange between the cattle feeder and the beef processor. If you will, I'll say that quality grading is how good a product is or how good a carcass is. Yield grading is fundamentally how much do I have. So we delineate this outcome as a score of 1 through 5. On the far left, a yield grade 1 carcass is extremely trim and heavily muscled. As we advance to the right, a yield grade 5 carcass is extremely over finished and typically lighter muscled. The numbers above each of those ribeye illustrations indicate where we are currently as a beef grading in this country. About 4% 1s, 31% 2s, half of our population is 3s, almost 13% 4s, and only 2% 5s. I highlighted in yellow the words fat thickness because fat thickness is the primary driver of the outcome we know as yield grade. The other adjustments are just that. They're adjustments to the original measurement of back fat thickness. I'm going to briefly go through carcass discounts and premiums, and then I'll wrap this presentation up. The most common outcome for a discount is a carcass that graded USDA Select. I mentioned that was only about 14% of our beef population, and currently that's a $13 per 100 pounds of carcass discount. Another carcass discount in the quality realm is a carcass that grades USDA Standard. You see there's only 2 marbling scores represented there, the traces and the practically devoid marbling score, and that's almost a $29 per hundredweight discount, which is a signal by the beef processor they absolutely don't want those carcasses, primarily because they don't have a buyer for them. And so there's a strong economic signal, don't bring one of those to market, please. Another discount in this time in the yield realm is bringing a carcass that's over finished. A yield grade 4 and a yield grade 5 carcass both carry a discount because of the lower yield that those carcasses attain. Realize that in the modern beef processing system, we're going to trim away all of the fat, save for about a 1/4 inch of back fat, vacuum package that primal, and put it into a box. And so in either of these images, almost 1 inch of back fat will be trimmed off and that yield lost. So that packer no longer can sell that fat as a retail cut. Rather, they end up selling that fat as inedible tallow or edible tallow, and they'll either sell it back to the cattle feeder as a ration ingredient, or they'll sell it for biodiesel manufacturing. Another quality outcome is what we call a hard bone in the industry. This is something that it is typically only worried about in a heifer that may or may not have been pregnant, particularly a heifer that is marketed as a quote unquote heiferette, and or a late cut bull. And by that, I mean a bull that was castrated late in its age. Both of those categories are at high risk to be a hard bone when they're evaluated in the cooler. And that's a $34 per hundredweight discount. Another quality discount would be the infamous dark cutter. Those animals were in a very stressful event in the hours to days prior to slaughter, and they burned up their glycogen supply prior to death, and they do not have a glycogen supply that will allow them to decrease lactic acid or increase lactic acid and decrease pH post-mortem. Thus, the muscle color remains dark and the muscle remains high in pH. Those cattle have an extremely short shelf life because of the high pH, and they're very tough to sell to the modern consumer because they look different than everything else in the retail case. Those products are typically sold to what we call a red label consumer, someone who knows what they're buying. They realize they're purchasing dark cutting beef. They're typically sold to mom and pop restaurants who would purchase that steak and they would cook it for you, and you would never see the raw product. I threw in a a unique discount specifically for this webinar because of the Criollo cattle that we will be evaluating. And I want you to recognize that the picture on the left does say dairy and the picture on the right does say beef. There is a discount applied in our industry for an animal with dairy conformation. Now, I realize that the Criollos are not dairy cattle, but they are average to light in muscling, and they may receive a dairy conformation discount at slaughter, which is why I threw that in there. This is something that we'll certainly monitor if that indeed does happen. And if it does happen, we should expect a small discount to be applied. Then getting into premiums, the carcass premium that we're all shooting for in the industry is a prime carcass, high prime on the left, average prime in the middle, and low prime on the right. Currently, that's about a $13 per hundredweight premium applied to the carcass value. And then there's a premium choice category as well. I briefly mentioned that earlier. We sort the high choice and average choice cattle independent of low or commodity choice, and we sell those at a premium. Many of you might recognize the brands on the right: Certified Angus Beef, then Sterling Silver, Chairman's Reserve. There are approximately 40 premium choice brands today, and so that whole category has almost become its own quality grade in our current marketing system. And then the last premium that we can find in a carcass is a yield grade 1 or 2. So the packer is paying a small premium for an extremely trim, well-muscled carcass that requires minimal trimming on their part. The yield grade 1 carcass on the left will be deboned and vacuum packaged. The yield grade 2 on the right will have extremely minimal trimming, deboned, and vacuum packaged. And so that improves their yields, and thus they offer a small premium for such.